So you're making your beat and you try to program in your 808s and you run into this very common problem. Today I'm going to be breaking down exactly what's happening when you run into this problem and how you can go about solving it. Alright, so let's say I have my beat here, everything's sounding good to me so far. And now it comes time to program in the 808s. And let's say this is the 808 pattern that I've come up with. By the way, if coming up with 808 patterns is something that you struggle with, I did a video on it a while back, so check that out after this video is done if that's something that you want to see. So it sounds good to me as it is right now, but let's say if I take it off of solo and I want to hear how it sounds with the rest of the beat. All of a sudden the 808 sort of gets drowned out and I can't really hear it anymore. At this point, if I go into the mixer and I start turning up the volume, you guys can hear. It ends up flooding the beat and it doesn't get all that much louder in the mix overall. If I take this 808 pattern and I play it an octave higher, now I can hear it a lot better, but all of a sudden the 808 doesn't have any bass in it. It's not doing its job of providing the low end in the beat. So this is a common problem that I see a lot of producers run into, where they have a hard time getting their 808s to do the two things that we need them to do, to provide the low end in the beat as well as cut through the mix. Now I'm sure a lot of you are already 2 steps ahead of me here, and you know that the thing to do at this point is to add distortion. But what I want to do here is an in-depth analysis on what distortion actually does, why it's so effective at solving this problem, and how you can use distortion to solve a lot of your low-end problems that you run into. So starting off, what distortion is doing is changing the shape of our 808. Fundamentally, what we're doing is taking our 808 shape, which might look something like this, and after we add distortion, the shape of our 808 changes into looking something like this. Now you might be thinking, so what? How does this help us in this situation here? But let's analyze what's happening to the frequencies of our 808. So I have my EQ here. What I'm going to do is chart out the different peaks and the different frequencies of my 808 without distortion. Alright, so you guys can see I charted out a bunch of different points along the frequency spectrum of this 808 that doesn't have distortion on it. Now what I'm going to do is turn on the distortion on the 808 and see how this compares now. Alright, so right off the bat, you guys can see this is really different. So again, these points all along here, these little dots, these are where the peaks were for the 808 without distortion. And this white line here, this is how our 808 looks with distortion on. So generally speaking, you guys can see with distortion on, we have less going on in the low end here. So here's the peak with the distortion off. And here's the peak with distortion on at 40 Hertz. So we have a little bit of a gap here, so there's less bass. Our 808 that didn't have distortion on it, there wasn't as much going on in the higher end on these higher points here, which is why we're able to hear it so much more in the mix once we added distortion onto the 808. And this is pretty much exactly what we want. You guys remember, without the distortion on this 808, we did have the low end, we did have the bass in the 808, but beyond that, it wasn't actually adding much to the beat. And you guys remember when we took this 808 pattern and we bumped it up an octave, we could hear it a lot more in the mix, but we lost a lot in the low end. And that's why distortion is such a useful tool. It'll help you compromise in between these two options, where we do get to add a lot more in the higher frequency ranges where we can actually hear it in the mix, but we won't lose as much of the low end. And this makes perfect sense with what I showed you guys before. We know that the shape of the sound's waveform is going to dictate what frequency range the sound takes up, and so if we go in and distort our sound, fundamentally what we're doing is changing the shape of the waveform and therefore changing the frequency range that this sound takes up. Different wave shapes, different frequencies that it takes up. Another useful thing to note is that distorting our 808s won't drastically affect our levels if we do it right. So this is how our 808 looks in terms of its overall level in the beat before distortion. You guys can see on average it sort of floats around -5 dB. Now once I add distortion onto this, our overall level of the 808 doesn't actually change all that much, even though we can hear it in the mix a lot more. You guys remember when we tried to take this 808 without distortion and just turn it up in the beat? Essentially what we're doing is taking all of the frequencies in the sound and just bumping them all up. If most of those frequencies aren't ones that we actually need, what we're not doing is actually addressing the problem. What we did with distortion was took a little bit away from the low end of the 808 and we added a little bit more to the higher end, the mid-range as well. And so it makes sense that the overall output of the 808 is not going to change as much. We basically added frequencies that we need and we took away frequencies that we needed less of. And that's why distortion is such a useful tool. If you guys have found this video helpful, please let me know in the comment section below. As well, if you want me to review different types of distortion tools, if you think that would be helpful, let me know in the comment section below as well. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. My free jump kit is available in the description box below as always, and I will see you guys next Tuesday.